Okay, so we're starting this morning at Chof Ches Amid Bay is the very last line. We started the Mishnah last week. The Mishnah talks about how we deal with compensation if the finder finds, let's say, an animal that eats and works or eats and doesn't work. In other words, this is a balancing test, as we've always said, between what the finder is responsible for under the mitzvah Hashem Teshivain and the preservation of the principle, if you will, of the actual item that's being found to help the owner. So that's the balancing test, and the Mishnah tells us that depending on what kind of animal it is, you can either sell it or use it or change it for money. Now, the second half of that Mishnah, which is what we're going to deal with right now, I want to take a quick look back up a few lines to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "Ma yebedamin." Okay, now you've sold it. You're holding the money. You have $100. What do you do with the money? You just leave it there. Don't you leave it there? It's machlokes between Rav Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva. So look, in the Mishnah we said Rav Tarfon Omer yishtamish bohen. You can use the money. Therefore, if it's lost, it is oved, like chai b'achriyusin. You have to return it. So l'chayra what? You're a shayim b'sachar. You're a shayim b'sachar because you have use of the money, and you have to return it. Rabbi Akiva omer lo yishtamish bohem. You can't use it. Lefichach im avdu and chai b'achriyusin. Okay, very straightforward machlokes. Can you use the money? You're a shayim b'sachar. If you can't use the money, you're essentially a shayim tinam, and therefore you're not chai b'achriyusin for a shayim. Okay, so that's the machlokes. So now, bottom line of that page, ma yebedamin. What do we do with the money? Okay, so now we're going to get into this, and it's a little bit of a twist here. So we'll follow it carefully. Says the Gemara, and we're going to flip on to Chof Tes Amud Aleph here. Ad kan lo pligi. There is no machlokes between Rav Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva. Ella fishin nishtamish b'hem. So here, what does it mean shenishhtamish b'hem? So Rashi says Ella mishum schar shimush mos. The schar of the use of the money, not that you used it, but the schar of the use of the money is what the machlokes is. So Rav Tarfon says you can use the money. That makes you a shayim b'sachar. And Rabbi Akiva says you can. No, it doesn't make you a shayim b'sachar if you could just use the money. Aval lo nishtamish b'hem. But if he didn't use the money, or put differently, he didn't have the right to use the money. He didn't have the right to use the money. Im avdu potter, everybody agrees, even Rav Tarfon agrees it's potter. So you have here a distinction, says the Gemara, between Rav Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva on, I guess what we would say, several levels. On the one hand, if you have the right to use it, because that's how Rashi interprets Ela Kishin Ishtamish Behen. Yes, he can actually use it, but he has the right to use it. Then there's a machlokes whether or not Rav Tarfon says that already makes him a shayim b'sachar, and Rabbi Akiva says lo yishtamish behen. He shouldn't use it. So in other words, if he has the right to use it but doesn't use it, Rav Tarfon says you're still chayiv. If he has the right to use it but doesn't use it, Rav Tarfon says you're chayiv, and Rabbi Akiva says you're potter. That's what the Gemara is telling us. Now Rashi says something else, which we'll read the Rashi, but we'll touch on in a minute. Mishum schar shimush mos, the schar of shimush, of use of the money. Aval schar shmiras mitzvah. This is very interesting. Aval schar shmiras mitzvah, the schar of the shmira, meaning the following the mitzvah. The name amigo, you could say amigo, the lo boy lemesev Rifta la'aniya ha'osek b'mitzvah poter min ha'mitzvah. Wait a minute. If he wasn't busy with this mitzvah, what would he be doing? Well, he might be out there giving tzedakah taniyim. So the fact that he is the fact that he is not responsible for another mitzvah is a schar. You hear this? I'm doing a mitzvah, Isaac the mitzvah, poter min mitzvah, but because I'm poter min mitzvah, now I'm getting schar. I'm getting a benefit by not doing the other mitzvah, and that makes him a shem zachar. You hear such a thing? I mean, it's amazing. So the Gemara says, now if that's not relevant to this line, it will be in a minute, but Rashi anticipates it. According to this machlokes, we're not mechayiv him to become a shem zachar because he is potter from another mitzvah. Because l'chayra, being potter from another mitzvah is a value. If it's a value, it should make him a shem zachar, right? A shem zachar means you get some value from the money that you're using. But if you tell me that because he is guarding, so to speak, guarding the money of the Aveda, that means he doesn't have to do another mitzvah. That should make him a shem zachar. Okay, so keep that in mind in a minute when we actually get to the next line of the Gemara, but Rashi anticipates it here. Okay, so that's the machlokes between Rav Tarfon and Rabbi Kiva. But what's the upshot? The upshot of lo nishtamish b'hen. If he doesn't use the money, if he does not use the money, or having the right to use the money, Rav Tarfon agrees with Rabbi Akiva that you're not chayiv. You're not a shem zachar, and you're not a chayiv. You're not chayiv. Now let's make a distinction, by the way, just so we understand. Jay, one second. There's a difference in this view between use of the money or use of the actual chayfetz. No one says that you can take the object that's found. In other words, whether it's an animal or whatever it is, you can't use it. No one says you can use it. The only machlokes here is what happens if you exchange it for money. Can you use the money? But the underlying object is forbidden to you. So no one would say that if I didn't sell it, that I could use it. So in other words, Rav Tarfon even admits there's no such thing as using the chayfetz, only the money. But according to this interpretation of the machlokes, if he didn't have the right to use it, why? Because it was the actual animal or thing, then even Rav Tarfon admits you don't have to pay. Go ahead, Jay.
Why if somebody is just holding the money and watching it, why is that called such a hard mitzvah? He puts it on a safe or he just hides it somewhere. There's no work involved. There's nothing.
You're 100% right. You're 100% right. So we are loosely translating Isaac b'mitzvah poter min mitzvah that someone who does, the Torah says Hashiv Teshiveh. Okay, Hashiv Teshiveh, you can do nothing, put it in your safe, or you can be, I don't know, you move it around every day. I don't know what you do with it. But it is a mitzvah. It is a mitzvah. So in the larger sense, even though you're right, what's he doing? He's not really doing anything, right? He's just putting it down. Still, he's Isaac b'mitzvah. And the rule of Isaac b'mitzvah, poter min mitzvah, would guide us here to tell us what his responsibilities are vis-a-vis another mitzvah. But you're right. This isn't complicated. We're not talking about someone who's got to have armed guard 24/7.
Osek b'mitzvah is such a broad term that even if there's no effort involved,
yes.
But it's considered a way to not do another mitzvah?
L'chayra, yes. L'chayra, yes. Now, I brought it out here because Rashi brought it, but wait for the next line, because that's really where, according to Rabbi Yosef, who is the next Amora here to talk about, that's where it becomes relevant. But the answer to your question is yes. Okay. Now, let's look at Rashi can ishtamish lav dafka. Remember, not that he used it, the schar of shimush, the schar of being able to use it, is enough to give us that credibility to say that if he can use it, even if he didn't use it, Reb Tarfon says he's chayav. Okay, now, Frek the Gemara, second line, we just got through saying that in a case where he has no right to use it, Reb Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva agree that he's potter. That's a kasha on Rabbi Yosef. Why? Okay, because we have a Gemara that says that it's a shomer aveda, someone who's guarding an aveda, shomer aveda, Rabba Omar kishomer chinam. Rabba says that he's a shomer chinam. Just guarding an aveda is a shomer chinam. Rabbi Yosef Omar kishomer sachar. Rabbi Yosef says shomer aveda is like a shomer sachar. That's a kasha on Rabbi Yosef. Why? Because the two man the Omrim who argue, Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, both agreed that if he has no right to use it, there is no chiyuv. How can Rabbi Yosef say shomer aveda is a shomer sachar that flies in the face of the agreement between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Yehuda? So who is he hanging his hat on? Remember, an Amora who says something usually hangs his hat on a Tana. In other words, the Tanoim said what they said, came the Amoraim later, the next generation, and they said theirs, and they usually and they say, okay, and the Raya is from the Tana. What Raya is it from the Tana? How can Rabbi Yosef say that he's a shomer sachar? Neither the Tana Reb Tarfon or the Tana Rabbi Akiva says in a case where he can't use it that he's potter. He's never a shomer sachar. So that's the kasha on Rabbi Yosef. That's the kasha. Now, to be sure, let me get back, Jay, to what I was saying before. Rabbi Yosef is the mechaber. Rabbi Yosef is the one who says that the reason why he's a shomer sachar is because oisik b'mitzvah potter min mitzvah. That's what he holds. Rabbi Yosef holds a oisik b'mitzvah potter min mitzvah, makes him a shomer sachar. We don't see that in the machlokes between Rav Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva. That's the kasha. But Rabbi Yosef is the one who says that. So the chayra to yufta to Rabbi Yosef, it's a kasha on Rabbi Yosef. How can Rabbi Yosef say that he's a shomer sachar? Amalach Rabbi Yosef. So comes Rabbi Yosef, and he's going to make the following distinction. B'gneva v'aveda. The kul almalot pligi the chayiv. Geneva and aveda. Who is chayiv for Geneva and aveda? A shomer sachar. So by Geneva v'aveda, everybody agrees. The chayiv. So he's now learning pshat in the machlokes between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, and this is his interpretation. Even Rabbi Akiva, who says you don't use it, you're not chayiv, you're still automatically chayiv for a Geneva Aveda, because he interprets that Rabbi Akiva agrees that ha'oisik b'mitzvah potter min mitzvah, and therefore he's automatically a shomer sachar. In other words, according to Rabbi Yosef, there's no such thing as getting away with, oh, I'm not chayiv because I didn't use it. You're automatically chayiv at least Geneva and Aveda because you're a shomer sachar. So to your point, Jay, whether there's no work or a lot of work, it's a mitzvah kala, it's a mitzvah chamura. The Torah says, a mitzvah potter min mitzvah. I superimpose my case. My case is that he is he's quote unquote guarding an aveda. So he's doing a mitzvah. That's a mitzvah. To guard the aveda is a mitzvah.
Yeah.
Whether it's a tough mitzvah or not, we're not parsing that. So once he's already chayiv in a mitzvah, he's potter from another mitzvah, and that makes him a shomer sachar because he gets a schar. It's a very unusual way of looking at it, but that's Rabbi Yosef Shita.
Yeah.
Okay,
Rabbi,
Yeah.
wouldn't you say that somebody that's watching, well, if he's finds it and he's just keeping it and he just puts it away in a drawer and he's waiting for somebody to claim it, he's going to be somewhat diligent in case of loss. However, if he used it, he would seem to be more responsible for it because he's continuously aware that he's using it for something. So he knows, it's in his mind. He's got it in his mind that he's using it. He knows it's not his, and he's keeping it more secure than if he would just put it in a drawer and forget about it.
There's no question, David, you're right, that there is a distinction, but according to Rabbi Yosef, they're both, even though one is much easier or lighter than the other, they still fall within the same category of benefit. You're getting a benefit. Now you can get a real benefit because you're using the money. You can make a lot of money with that money. That's a big benefit. Or you could keep it in the drawer, do nothing with it, and you're getting a benefit because of Isaac the mitzvah. I know it sounds totally asymmetrical. I mean, how do you compare one to the other? But that's Rabbi Yosef Shita, that once you have any obligation, however slight, which is considered a mitzvah, you're now in the throes of that mitzvah, and you no longer have to do another mitzvah. Now, to be sure, you'll get schar if you do another mitzvah. Okay, if you give money to poor people or or whatever, of course you'll get schar. But it's coming to tell us that if you want to skim along with the minimum, we're not gonna hold you responsible for all those other mitzvahs because you're Isaac the mitzvah. Make no mistake, you can do all the mitzvahs simultaneous and get schar for everything. We're talking about a minimal, not a maximal. So at a minimum, he's doing a mitzvah. The Torah says that let's not bother him to do another mitzvah at the same time. It's not, he's already doing a mitzvah. Now you're going to argue, well, what kind of mitzvah? He put it in his drawer and he, for safekeeping. That's not there's no comparison to that, to actually working it and doing it and being mechayiv. No question about it. So we have two opposite ends of the spectrum here as to what's considered value. In other words, using it, tremendous value. Not using it, just putting it in your drawer to watch it, that's also value, according to Rabbi Yosef, only according to Rabbi Yosef. Now,
this seems to be, as far as Russian, sort of abusing the concept of being osek b'mitzvah. The classic example I think of, my dad used to do a lot of shmira for people who passed away until the funeral, and he organized it for many years, had other people doing it. And one of the things about that is you were literally osek in the mitzvah, and so then you couldn't go off to shul to daven with a minyan, do things like that anymore. Right. You could do right then and there. We were very limited what you could do beyond sit there and say Tehillim, so on. And that's literally, you are sort of body and soul involved in that mitzvah.
Of course.
And because of that, or osek the mitzvah, you're pater min mitzvah.
According to this shita, yes.
And this would seem to say, I find a lost animal, I take it home, and now 24/7 I'm pater from,
Exactly.
Who knows?
Let me give you another interesting. I mean, actually, you're 100% right. But let me give you another interesting example. Someone loses a family member, right? Then he's pater from tefillah, because he's Isaac in the Kavura, right?
He's an Onik.
Yeah, okay, fine. Everybody knows that, that's fine. Now, the question comes up, what happens if he's in a circumstance where he absolutely cannot be Isaac in anything related to the Kavura? May he do other things like daven or otherwise? Because the whole exemption is because you're otherwise occupied in the mitzvah of Havoy Sameis. What happens if it's not relevant? Just like Menashe's example. What happens if it's totally not relevant? What do you do? So that's a shaila. There is a shaila there, and there's some things that you can do and some things that you can't do. But you see that the question arises is, do we want to take advantage of this? In other words, so according to Rabbi Yosef, it's not taking advantage. If you have a mitzvah, don't we say kala kachamura? How do we know that Shluch HaKain is as easy mitzvah as opposed to Maser and Truma and other things, which may be a harder mitzvah. How do we know? We don't know. So we don't judge the level of the difficulty of a mitzvah. Kala kechamura, a simple one, just as well as a harder one. So Rabbi Yosef says there's a mitzvah hashavas aveda. Now, it could have been at a time back then where we didn't have the as easy as today. Maybe guarding a lost object was more complicated than we have it today. Today, you put it in your safe deposit box and you don't worry about it. Someone comes, you can take it out of the safe deposit box, especially if it's a very valuable jewel. You're not fretting about it. In those days, they probably went berserk. How am I going to protect this expensive jewel that I'm supposed to guard? So I have to guard it 24/7. I can't let anybody into the house. In other words, let's think about it from that point of view, that at one point in time, guarding a Aveda may have been more complicated than it is today. Nevertheless, that doesn't sound like a complicated mitzvah. Torah says, Hashif Teshivain, it's a mitzvah. Comes Rabbi Yosef and says, if that's the case, Isaac the mitzvah potem and a mitzvah, and that makes him a shomer sacher all of a sudden. But as to the question, I think we all have legitimate questions. Is this right? The simple answer is it's a mitzvah, and it's not for us to judge that it's a mitzvah that he could just do very simply, and he should do other mitzvahs. Okay, Tamal of bracha if he can do other mitzvahs, but we're not going to penalize him if he doesn't. Nevertheless, with regard to our Gemara, let's just go back to our Gemara. So Rabbi Yosef says, okay, according to him, what is the machlekes? Because the kasha was, how does he reconcile that if you can't use it, it's potter even according to Rav Tarfon. So now he moves into a different sort of sphere, and he says, no, the machlekes is not b'gneva v'aveda. Gneva v'aveda, even Rav Akiva agrees you're chayiv because of what? Because you're a shomer sacher, because of Isaac the mitzvah. Ki pligi, the machlekes between Rav Tarfon and Rav Yehuda, but onson the show. What is the machlekes? Rav Tarfon savar. Rav Tarfon says shorele rabbanan lishtamusha begabei. You know what? You are a shoel. Remember, there are 4 different categories of the shomer chinam, shomer sacher, a soicher, and a shol. The shol has the greatest responsibility because he's borrowing it to use. Therefore, he's responsible, even if it's a mere accident that he has no responsibility for, he's responsible because he borrowed it. Okay, that's a shol. Now, Rav Tarfon says, you know what? He's a shol, he can use it, and therefore he is chayiv. Rabbi Akiva Sava lo shorile rabbanan l'shtamusha begabei. Even though you classify him as a shol, the rabbis did not allow him to use it. Therefore, he's not a shol. Okay, so Rabbi Yosef wants to answer the kasha on him by saying, you know what? The machlokes is not by avdu, which is the first version that the Gemara tells us. The machlokes is by shaul. If you're telling me the machlokes is by shaul, then it's no longer a tiyufta on Rabbi Yosef, because Rabbi Yosef agrees in his view that Gneva Vaveda, everybody's mechayiv because of Isaac the mitzvah. Okay, so that's how Rabbi Yosef wants to wiggle out of this kasha. Let's take a look at Rashi. Shomer chinam bein a chayiv ela b'pshia. The shomer chinam is only chayiv by if he's careless. In other words, anything beyond his own negligence, he's not chayiv. Shomer sacher chayiv b'gneva aveda the shomer sacher mitzvahi the Isaac the mitzvah potem and a mitzvah. You see, here he says this is Rabbi Yosef's version that he's a shomer sacher because Isaac the mitzvah potem and a mitzvah. Okay, so that's where we're holding right now. We're holding that there's a machlokes between our Gemara and that of Rav Yosef's version as to whether or not there is a machlokes between Rav Tarfon and Rabbi Yehuda if he lost it. According to our version, everybody agrees in Avdu Potter. According to Rabbi Yosef's version, you're not Potter because of Isaac the mitzvah, Potter min mitzvah. Okay, that's the Gemara. Now comes a really interesting question. What does the Mishnah tell us? The Mishnah says it's a two-parter. Rav Tarfon Amar Yishtamish Bahen Lefichach. Therefore, so now there's a therefore, because you can use it, you have to return it. Rabbi Akiva says you can't use it, and there's a therefore, ein chad b'achriyusim. Fret the Gemara, ihachi lefichach d'amar Rabbi Akiva lamali. What do you need the lefichach for? The lefichach is, if you do this, then this is what the consequence is. So, in the Torah, we're more makbid by saying every word in the Torah is so critical. If there's an extra word in the Torah, we go all over to try to understand why there's an extra word in the Torah. Okay, in the Gemara, you don't find it with that hakbada, but the Gemara asks a good question. If you're going to tell me that the machlokes between Rav Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva is whether or not he is considered a shaul, and therefore can he use it or not? Why does he say lefika? Now, the Gemara is going to explain the kasha here. If you say, like we say in our Gemara, that the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon is begineva va'aveda, udepligi, that's where the argument is. Hanadiktani Rabbi Akiva oimer. So we understand Rabbi Akiva says, lo yishtamish bahen. Okay, even though it's permitted, you may not use it. In other words, maybe you have the right to use it, but according to Rabbi Akiva, absolutely you don't. Lefichach im avdu enechayiv ba'achariyusan. Therefore, the word lefichach is necessary. In other words, if you're going to go with our version, that the machlokes, like the second, in other words, the version that says that by Aveda and Geneva, the machlokes is between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, then I understand lefika. Why do I understand lefika? Why? So kedat chamina. He's going to explain. I would have thought that Rabbi Akiva ascribes to Rabbi Yosef's interpretation that he's a shomer sacha because of Isaac the mitzvah, potem and a mitzvah, ubegeneva aveda mechayev, and therefore he's chayev begeneva aveda. In other words, looking at Rabbi Akiva says lo yishtamish, therefore he can't use it. But lo yishtamish isn't sufficient according to Rabbi Yosef, because you're automatically a shomer sacha. It doesn't matter what you do. The fact that you're Isaac the mitzvah, potem and a mitzvah, means that you're designated as a shomer sacha. Therefore, I don't care if you don't use it, you're still chayev b'achriyusim. Kamash malam lefichach. That's why the lefichach comes. Hashtag amad lo yishtamish behem shomer sacha lo yhave. You understand? In other words, it's a beautiful chap. If you say that the machlokes between Rav Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva is whether or not he's considered he's chai for geneva va'aveda, then I understand why you need lefika. Why? Because according to this version, Rabbi Akiva is automatically chayiv whether he uses it or doesn't use it, because Rabbi Yosef says you're a shomer sacha. And how is Rabbi Akiva going to get out of that? Because if you hold Rabbi Yosef's view that everybody who is Isaac the mitzvah is automatically a shomer sacha, then it doesn't matter whether he doesn't use it. Rabbi Akiva can go out and stand on a public square and says, you may not use it. you're still chayiv because you're Shema Sachar, because you're Isaac b'mitzvah. Therefore, not only does Rabbi Akiva say in the Mishnah, Lo yishtamish behem, lefikach im avdu en chai b'achriyusan, I disassociate myself from Rabbi Yosef's view that I'm a Shema Sachar. That's what the Gemara, that's what the lefikach is. So under that view, I understand why you have to have lefikach. Because I would have thought, even if you say in uncontroverted terms, you may not use it, the upshot is you're still chayiv because Isaac b'mitzvah, patur ben mitzvah. Comes the Gemara, the Mishnah tells us, lefichach, because he doesn't use it, he's not chayiv, which means what? That he disassociates himself from Rabbi Yosef's view. That says the Gemara, I understand. But says the Gemara, but if you're going to follow the second view, Rabbi Yosef's view, that the Gneva Vaveda, everybody says you're chayiv. Why? Because of Isaac the mitzvah, ki pligi ba'onsen de shol. The only question is, are you considered a shol and responsible for an accident? My lefikach Rabbi Akiva. Why do you need the word lefikach according to Rabbi Akiva? Hachim aboy le'lemista. This is the way the Mishnah should read. Rabbi Akiva Omer. Rabbi Akiva says, Lo yishtamish bohem. You may not use it. Va'anu yadana, and I know the kibbutz lo yishtamish bohem lav shol hava. Ve'enachai b'achriyuson. In other words, if you're going to interpret the Gemara the way Rabbi Yosef interprets it, that what? That everybody agrees that you're chayiv b'gneva aveda. The whole machlokes is by shol. Then you have a good kasha. If it's only by shol, why do you need the word lefika? Because that now it's straightforward. Rabbi Akiva says lo yishtamish, right? Rabbi Akiva says you can't use it. Va'ano yadana the kibbutz lo yishtamish lav shol haba ve'enachai b'achriyuson. Lefikach Rabbi Akiva lamali. So this is the Gemara's kasha. The whole word lefikach is a punchline that somehow is supposed to give us a better understanding of what happened right before. In other words, I do this, and therefore this is the case. So the Gemara just now gave us a clear understanding that works only in one respect, if you're going to say that there was a machlokes as to whether or not im avdu chayiv or potter. So according to Rabbi Tarfon is chayiv, and according to Rabbi Akiva is potter. But if you're going to say that everybody agrees that he is considered a shema sacha because of Isaac mitzvah potter ben mitzvah, then why do you need the word lefikach? It's self-explanatory that if the machlokes is whether he's a shol or not, and Rabbi Akiva says you may not use it, then of course he's not a shol. If you can't use it, he's not allowed to use it. Why would you make him a shol? Only Rabbi Tarfon says that. So that's the Gemara's kasha. It seems to me it's a solid kasha. Is the word lefikach can only work if you say that the machlokes is in Geneva Aveda itself, not like Rabbi Yosef. That's what it comes out to. So Rashi says, "Kulal lo pligid mechayiv kedin shema sacha." Now, look at the last Rashi. Ma lefikach Rabbi Akiva. Kivan the omalo yishtamesh. Since Rabbi Akiva says you may not use it, mehecha tesek adat mechayuva. How could you possibly make him chayiv the itztach lamei ein chayiv? That I have to come lefichach. If you tell me lo yishtamesh, he's not a shol. He's not a borrower. And anything that follows from that is very clear. I don't need the word lefikach to emphasize that he is that he's not chayiv. So that's the Gemara's kasha here, asking it, and the Gemara has a problem with it. So in other words, why, according to Rabbi Akiva, do you need lefikach under this circumstance? So Emphit the Gemara, which is a answer we find in other places in Shas. The emes is you don't need lefikach. And for the Gemara, Mishum lefikach the Rabbi Tarfon. In other words, we need the word, and we're going to see in a minute. We need the word lefikach according to Rabbi Tarfon. Therefore, we throw it in for Rabbi Yehuda just to make it look parallel. It should look the same. In other words, you have lefikach according to one, you have lefikach according to the other. But really, you don't need lefikach at all according to Rabbi Akiva, but you need it according to Rabbi Tarfon. Frek the Gemara lefikach Rabbi Tarfon lamali. What do I need the word lefikach to Rabbi Tarfon? Why does he need the word lefikach? Hachikam, says the Gemara. This is why you need. This is why you need it. Given the Shorele Rabban Lish the Musha Begavei, since the rabbis allowed him to use it. Remember, Rabbi Tarfon says that even if you're allowed to use it, whether you use it or not, it doesn't matter. Since the rabbis allowed him to use it, command the Ishtamish Begavei. It's as if he used it already, even if he never used it. The fact that he was allowed to use it is enough. B'chayev b'achriyusan, and he's chayev b'achriyusan. And so therefore, in other words, with respect to Rabbi Tarfon, the chiddush is that even once they allowed him to use it, it's as if he used it, and it's therefore, if it's as if he used it, therefore he's chayav b'achriyusan. So in other words, the Gemara here is telling us that even in Rav Tarfon, you might have thought if he doesn't use it, he shouldn't be chayiv. Therefore, the Mishnah tells us lefichach. Therefore, since he already has the right to use it, it's as if he used it and he's chayiv. So, because we use lefichach according to Rav Tarfon, we already parallel use it for Rabbi Akiva, even though according to Rabbi Akiva we don't need it. Again, this is the way the Gemara oftentimes balances out a machlokes by saying I need it for one of them under Amram, therefore I'm going to use it for both, even though I don't need it for both. So we don't need lefikach for Rabbi Akiva, but we put it in there just for symmetry. Okay, fine, I understand that, but nevertheless, according to Rabbi Tarfon. So what do we have here? So we have the following: we have a machlokes between our Gemara and Rabbi Yosef, hold on a second. Between our Gemara here and Rabbi Yosef's version as to whether or not our machlokes between Rav Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva by Geneva v'Aveda or by Shaul. And is it by Shem Esachar or is it by Shaul? And that gives rise to the very next question. But so if you take our meaning that the whole machlokes is only by Shem Esachar, then we understand. Rabbi Tarfon says you're a Shem Esachar because you have the opportunity to use it. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, as long as you don't use it, you're not a Shem Esachar. But if you hold like Rabbi Yosef, who introduces this concept of Oisik b'mitzvah, potem and mitzvah, so even he says Rabbi Akiva has to admit that you're a Shem Esachar. Then the machlokes is by Shaul. Are you considered a Shaul or not? Which is, in other words, that's a different standard because Shaul is a simple accident. It makes you already chayav by Shaul, not so by the others. Then the machlokes is whether or not you're a Shaul, and so that's how they interpret the difference between Rabbi Yosef and the other Gemara. And therefore, the lefikach is either necessary or unnecessary, depending on how you look at this particular situation. Now, all right. So let's go into the next. Okay, so let's follow up because I want to introduce something that I saw a beautiful vort from the tells of Rosh Hashiva on this Gemara. But now take a look. So on the bottom of Chav Tesam and Aleph, the Gemara asks a question. Of the Ketani, what does it say in the Mishnah? The Mishnah says, "Ma yebedamim of tafanam yishtamish bahem." You can use it. Lefikachim avdu chayav yachriusim. What does avdu mean? Avdu means you lose it. Therefore, if you lose it, you're chayav yachriusim according to Tarfon because you're a shomer sachar. And Rabbi Akiva says, "Lo yishtamish behem." Therefore, you're a shomer chinam. Lefikachim avdu and chayav yachriusim. So in the Mishnah, this whole machlokes, this whole discussion is in Avdu. Right? The Gemara, bottom of Chavtes and Aleph. Avdu Katanu. What are you telling me, Rabbi Yosef? That Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Tarfon both agree that Avdu is that you're Shai Masafa, and therefore you're Chayiv. What's the machlokes? Whether or not you're Shaul, whether you're Chayiv for an accident. Who's talking about a Shaul? Where do you come to introduce a Shaul? The Mishnah says him Avdu. Avdu has nothing to do with a Shaul. It has to do with a Shai Masachar. So the Gemara's kasha is very strong. You want to introduce, you, Rabbi Yosef, want to introduce that by Avdu, everybody admits you're Shai Masacha. The whole machlokes is by Shaul. Where do you come out of left field to start discussing Shaul when the Mishnah talks him Avdu, which is a Shomer Sachar? That's the kasha. Avdu Katani. The Mishnah says Avdu. Okay, so Chaf Tes Omid Beis, the top line. Kida Rabba. So now, the Gemara wants to say that Rabbi Yosef interprets his Gemara like Rabba. Why? The Omer Rabba. There's two classes here. There's two ways of looking at Avdu. Says Rabba. The Omer Rabba Nignavu Belistin Mizuyin. If someone was held up by armed robbers, Avdu should cover Sfinasa B'yom. Or what does Avdu mean? That the ship went down in the middle of the sea. According to Rabbah, those are two examples. Now, what do we talk about when we say Avdu? I give you something to hold for me, and I make you a Shem Sachar, okay, and you're chayiv. What are you chayiv for? Well, I have a responsibility to guard this object. So if it gets lost, meaning I misplaced it, I'm chayiv. Am I chayiv if it goes down in the middle of the sea? Is that avdu? That's the question. Is avdu inclusive when you say I lose it? Does that mean I lost it in the middle of the sea? Or I was strong-armed by a robber? Is that considered Geneva V'Aveda? According to Rabbah, no. That there's a different standard for Geneva V'Aveda for a Shomer Sachar as opposed to something so egregious that you can't even hold them responsible. So according to Rabbah, if a Shomer Sachar is on the Titanic and it goes down and he is saved, but the object isn't, he wouldn't be chayiv. He would not be chayiv because that's not avdu. That's not the interpretation of avdu. So take a look at Rashi. The Gemara later on in here, it tells us about a situation where you sent your money in advance. You sent it, and it got and it was robbed. So in that Gemara, that's where Rabbah makes that distinction. So now that we have a distinction between whether or not he lost it or it was stolen, so it says Rabbi Yosef, now the word avdu that the Mishnah is talking about is not the avdu that he's talking about. Two different avdus. Avdu, which is I wasn't careful and I lost it. Shemesach is chayiv. But avdu, where it was impossible to have saved it at all, it wasn't my fault. The ship went down. That's not considered avdu. So that's how Rabbi Yosef wants to make a distinction as to why he's talking about onsin, right? Shaul, even though the Mishnah is talking about avdu. So he's hanging his head on Rabbah that there are two different ways of looking at avdu. All right, so that's the Gemara's text. Now, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel comes Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel says halacha ki Rab Tarfon. The halacha is like Rab Tarfon. What does that mean? That means that you're entitled to use it, and therefore you're chayav b'achri use it. So he gives us a psak halacha like Rab Tarfon. Says the Gemara, Biad Rachva Havalehana Zuza Diyasme. Rachva was sort of the guardian or holding money for Yisomim. They were, underage Yisomim, and he was sort of protecting them. So he was holding their money. Also, the Kamed Rabbi Yosef, so he came in front of Rabbi Yosef, this Rabbi Yosef we're talking about. Amalei Ma'u Lishtamusha B'Gavei. Can I use this money? In other words, I'm holding this money. Can I use it? On Malay, Rabbi Yosef said, Hacham Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel, Halacha Rab Tarfin. I'm going to quote to you what Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel said, the Halacha is Rab Tarfin. Go ahead and use the money. You're allowed to use it. Amalei Abaya, comes Abaya and says, wait a minute, Balav Itma Allah. Didn't we learn a caveat on this halacha? Amar Rav Chelba, Amar Rav Huna, Lo Shanu, Ela B'Demei Aveda, Oil V'Torach Ba. There's a difference between Demei Aveda. What is Demei Aveda? I found something, and now I want to sell it and take that money and hold it for the owner. So says Abaya, didn't Rab Chelba say in the name of Huna, there's a difference between Demei Aveda, hold the Torach Ba, Aval Mos Aveda, the Lo Torach Ba, Lo. There's a difference here. Listen to this. There's a difference between, I found an object. The object will lose its value if I don't sell it, right? Let's say it's an animal. So the previous Mishnah told us you have to work at a shore for 12 months and a tarnagol for 90 days and whatever. Okay, so I'm a chuyev min Torah to do that. And after that, I can sell it and keep the money. So says Rav Abaya that Rav Chelba says in the name of Rav Huna, there's a difference between the B'mei Aveda. You know why you can use it? Hol v'torach ba, because you've been careful for 12 months or 90 days or 30 days. So because you're Torah, meaning you're working in it, therefore we allow you to use the money. Almost Aveda, the lo torach ba. But if you just found money, am I going to allow you to use it? So look at Rashi. That he sells it after he was involved with it. Let's say you found money, right? And it was stacked in such a way that you knew it wasn't hefker, right? Either because it was in a pocketbook or because he stacked it a certain way. You have to hold that. Are you going to tell me those two situations are the same? That you can use that money the same way you can use money from an Aveda that you sold, that you worked at? He says, no, you can't do that. There's a difference between Demei Aveda and Mos Aveda, the Lo Torach Ba. And he says, V'hanu k'mos Aveda dami. And he's saying that being the guardian of money from a Yisomim is not Demei Aveda, it's like Mos Aveda. So Abai is asking a kasha here, why do you say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yosef? That you can go ahead and, that the halacha is like Rabbi Tarfin, that you can go ahead and use the money. No, there was a caveat to that halacha. That's good only b'demei aveda when you were Torah. So we said, because you were busy working it, we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And when you sell it, you can use the money. But if you happen to find money that you know belongs to somebody because there's a simon, like, a purse, we're not going to let you use the money. So Rabbi Yosef, Amalei Zil, he said to Rachva, Zil lo shafkali de ashvela. Forget about what I told you. Forget about what I told you. The halacha is not, in this case, like Reb Tarfin. You can't use the money. You have to keep the money separate. And when the Yisomim become older, then you can give it to them. So anyway, what's the upshot? The upshot is the halacha is like Reb Tarfin, but now we made a chilek between Demei Aveda, where you sold something after you worked it. Says the Torah, we're going to give you the benefit of using the money because you were diligent in trying to work the animal, so that, remember what we said, that an owner rather have his own animal than money. So for 12 months or 90 days, you worked it, didn't work out, you sold it, use the money. But most Aveda, money from an Aveda, you may not use. Okay, so that's the maskana of our Gemara, and we see the chiluk. So in the few minutes that I have remaining here, I want to introduce you to an interesting question that Rav Mordechai Gifter Zechet Tzadik Livracha, the Rosh Yeshiva tells, asked in discussing this Gemara with a Chaber. So in his Sefer, the Nesilas Mordechai, he has the following excerpt. Okay, it's fairly long, but I'm just going to read a portion of it because I wanted you to understand the chap here that he's asking. Okay, so the title is Shomer Aveda Rabba Amar Kishomer China, Rabbi Yosef Amar Kishomer Sachar. Okay, Rabba says that the Shomer Aveda, according to Rabba, is a Shomer Chinam, and therefore he's not chayiv. And Rabbi Yosef says Kishomer Sachar because of Isaac the mitzvah, Pater min mitzvah. Okay, so let me just read this. Nishalti esmal zeis hakasha, lefi Rabbi Yosef the Amar the Shomer Aveda have a Shomer Sachar, mishum she'Isaac the mitzvah Pater min mitzvah. Nimtza, we find the whole Shomer Chinam have a Shomer Sachar. So Rav Gifter is asking the following question: wait a minute, how do you even have a Shomer Chinam? If you're going to tell me that you follow Rav Yosef's theory that Isaac b'mitzvah Pater min mitzvah and he's a Shomer Sachar, we can never have a Shomer Chinam. Why? The Shomer Chinam mekayim mitzvah gemilas chasadim. If you're going to tell me that a Shomer Sachar is someone who is Isaac b'mitzvah, then what about a Shomer Chinam? A Shomer Chinam finds something, he has no achrayus, and he holds on to it. That's a Gemilas Chesed. And Gemilas Chesed is a mitzvah also in the Torah.
Stam, anyone asks you for a favor, and
That's right.
you're inclined to do it, and you say, sure, I'll help you out. Yeah.
That's right. The imkei nimtza the Rabbi Yosef ikarak shloisha shomrim. There's no such thing as a Shomer Chinam. Shomer Sachar, Seicher, and Shoel. Because a Shomer Chinam automatically becomes a Shomer Sachar because of Gemilas Chesed.
Right.
That's a tremendous question he's asking. So how?
It's even, can I borrow a cup of sugar? And you're taking that cup of sugar to his house. You're doing a chesed.
You're doing a chesed. You're doing a chesed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so simple that it's almost unbelievable that
there would never be in theory a Shomer Chinam.
Can never be a Shomer Chinam.
Right.
Right? The Afil Rabba the lo have a Shomer Chinam kitzas Shomer Sachar. The Afil Rabba who says that your Shomer Chinam have a Shomer Chinam kitzas Shomer Sachar. He's at least a part Shomer Sachar. Shahloi Shomer Sadavar bechinam. He's guarding the item bechinam. K'dei she'ache yaseh l'toiva v'yishmud be'ado bechinam. So that's the kasha he asks. How could you ever have a Shomer Chinam, right? Because there's always the mitzvah of Gemilas Chesed. So I found that it's an incredibly interesting shaila. So now I'll skip further up. So he said, so he gets al etzem akasha nearly the ein ze klal Gemilas Chesed. So he goes into the subject. He says no. That it's not Gemilas Chasadim im Chavera Yachal Shalem Avor Hashmira. In other words, if it's not in the act of what he's doing, but later on there is some kind of reciprocity, he says that's not Gemilas Chasadim. Okay, why? If I give $1 to Warren Buffett, am I doing a Gemilas Chesed? So he says, Ein ze Gemilas Chesed. I'm going to give money to a wealthy guy. That's Gemilas Chesed. Remember what we said. We said in the previous, we had a previous Gemara that a finder likes to use simanim. Why? Because if he uses simanim, then if he winds up losing something at some point in time, they'll also use simanim. In other words, he gets a benefit because of reciprocity. So says he says over here, because he'll reciprocate and watch it for him for free. In other words, right? There'll be reciprocity at a later point in Zeh. That doesn't exist. He can't force his friend later on to watch for him. So because I watched yours, you're going to watch mine? No, you can't assume that. You can't assume that there will be reciprocity at a later point in time because I did you a favor, you'll do me a favor. And then he brings down the Svarazuki element says the Nichale Lahaksa Aveni Bisimanim Kidei Sheim Yavado Yaxelo Gamke Bisimanim. So he brings down our Gemara that I just said. The Hossam Al Karcha Hamochi Yem Mokrat Lahakzelo. There by the Simonim, we say, of course, the finder will want to return it to him with Simonim. In other words, he's making a distinction between the case of the Simonim, which we just mentioned, and the case of I watched yours, you'll watch mine. So, in other words, the answer is that unless there is in real time, a reciprocity, there's no such thing as Gemilas Chesed. Gemilas Chesed has to be in the moment, says he. So if in the moment there's no Gemilas Chesed, I can't rely on the fact that you may do something for me later on, therefore I'll have a benefit, right? Like a Isaac the mitzvah, potem in a mitzvah, that's in real time. I'm Isaac the mitzvah, therefore, whether it's a hard mitzvah or not a hard mitzvah, Isaac the mitzvah, potem in a mitzvah. But the Gemilas Chesed isn't in the same category. So it's an interesting question. The L'chaira Gemilas Chesed should be the same as a Shemus Sacher. Teretz is it's not, because Gemilas Chesed you can't force Gemilas Chesed. I can't force on you to do for me what I did for you. Go ahead, Chaim.
No, but generally speaking, then osek b'mitzvah pater min a mitzvah. If I'm learning Torah, I'm pater from davening in a very real sense, according to that.
Exactly right. So we have in the famous Gemara, the famous Agada, where the Agada tells us, "He gives my krish mashal shachris." I know you're learning. Of course you're learning, but there is b'shas ma'aseh. There is a mitzvah that you lose the schar of that mitzvah if you don't daven now.
And that may be true, but technically they're on firm ground to
technically
learning.
Yeah, right.
Or if I'm doing anything else more inconsequential than learning,
I'll
I'm still
grant
on firm ground.
Yeah, Chaim, I'll grant you that. I'll grant you on technical grounds, you don't have to daven because you're learning. But if you have two mitzvahs and you can be mekayim both, but you have to juxtapose and say, here I'm learning, now I'm davening, then I'm learning.
But if in a certain extenuating circumstance, I'm driving somewhere, I'm going to be Menachem Ovel or something, and I'm on the road, it's just not the time to stop and daven Mincha Maariv because I'm osek b'mitzvah.
So you're right. There the shaila is, if you're osek b'mitzvah and you lose the schar of the mitzvah. So this is an important caveat. Are you going to lose that opportunity to do the mitzvah if you divert your attention to another mitzvah? So in a case where you lose tefillah b'zmano, then we say, okay, I understand you're learning Torah, it's a big mitzvah, but tefillah b'zmano is a big mitzvah and you're going to lose it. Now,
but technically you're okay.
Technically,
continue driving, even though you could stop for a minute, you just don't want to, and you can daven Mincha Maariv on the turnpike. but you continue davening to go to your destination, and you're just relying on that. I'll just get less car. I know that's not very nice, but
So that's a shaila for your local rav as to whether or not how you maneuver that, because you're right. Maybe in some circumstance,
in every circumstance,
listen. Again, there's a way of davening later on. Maybe you can hop around.
doesn't matter. I want you to tell me that I'm on safe ground, even though I'm no tzaddik. You know, I mean,
Right.
we
Chaim,
all know that I'm trying to get away with things. but-
Chaim, in Eretz Yisrael, you see it all the time in the afternoon. No matter what road you're on, the highways or 446, people pull over.
And
The
daven
first
mincha.
time I saw that, I said, how many flat tires are there in Eretz Yisrael?
Right.
And my wife says they're all davening. There's no flat tires.
Right. But this is a fascinating shaila, because if you think that oisik b'mitzvah potem and a mitzvah, then l'chayra givulas chesed is a mitzvah. I just found it fascinating as I was looking through.
And one other thing, Rabbi Grauman, what was bothering Tosfos on the previous daf? I've never seen a larger Tosfos to Gemara ratio.
I know.
What was exercising Tosfos so much?
Yeah. There's a whole series of shilas there. Maybe next week we'll get into a couple.
Let's learn that Tosfos. Okay.
Yeah, mitzvah Shem. Maybe we'll look at it. But anyway, I just found this interesting, so I wanted to bring it up. And so he gives a satisfactory answer, and he says no, that there's no Indian here of the Milas Chesed. So Mitzvah Shem, next week I'll take a look at that Tosfos to see what it's a very long one, but we'll start at the Mishnah next week, Mitzvah Shem. But it's again, this is a whole fascinating discussion that the Gemara brings down on this whole question of Shem Echina, Shem Isachar, Shol, Rav Yosef, and Rabbah. So, all right. So Mitzvah Shem will.
We also want to acknowledge that Svi Malin was with us the whole year.
Svi, thank you for joining us. Svi. Yeah.
Oh, and Rabbi Grauman, I realized that next week's Parsha is Mishpatim, so actually it's perfect timing.
Perfect timing, exactly. All right. So Zag Gesundheit, everybody. Have a wonderful week.
Here we go.
Thank you.
Yeah.